This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your source for the latest Iowa ag news headlines right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning team of Dustin Hoffman, Riley Smith, Mark Magnuson, and Andy Peterson. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Mark.
Hello and welcome into Ag Matters PM on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Mark Magnuson. Thanks so much for tuning in to our first show of 2025. It is January 6th, 2025, and we're so glad you can join us for today's episode. In today's episode, I will be joined by Robin Schmahl of agmarket.net to run down our closing markets. But first, it is my conversation with Eric Wilson of Wyffels. We had the chance to talk about the very wet start to the 2024 growing season and how the faucet turned off, and we finished with a very dry 2024. And of course, we start looking ahead to 2025 and lessons we can take away from last year.
Mark Magnuson for the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and I'm joined today by Eric Wilson from Wyffels Hybrids. Eric, thanks for taking the time to join me here today. Could you remind me your role within the Wyffels organization, please?
Yeah, agronomy manager. There's two of us in the state, and I'm covering the southern parts and the eastern parts of the state of Iowa.
And Eric, this year we know was a wild year in terms of weather. We started off so very wet, and then we close out the growing season with essentially two just flat-out drought months, the last 2 months of the year. So what did that mean for our Iowa farmers and the things they were dealing with this year in terms of the weather?
A lot of variability across the state of Iowa. Reports of guys, setting field records, operation records for bushels of corn, and then, some things that are not so great. And I would say for the most part, everyone experienced a little bit of both. With that wet weather that we had in the spring, we lost a tremendous amount of nitrogen. So we spent a lot of time this summer talking about nitrogen management and what we could do to maybe help or circumvent some of those issues that we were anticipating. And then unfortunately, for a lot of the state, we got to the late to mid grain fill period and we just turned off dry. And that doesn't bode well for trying to fill kernels, especially with some of the areas that had some later planting dates,
So Eric, with all that being said, I've still talked to, like you said, a lot of farmers who are very pleased with their yield numbers. Does that just go all back to show how much technology, how much hard work has gone into getting the best seed in the bag to begin the season?
Yeah, the value of our modern genetics is hard to put a value on, especially if you think about the last 2 years back to back, Mark. We've came off of what a lot would call a historic drought in 2023. Some cases even into 2022, and now we've had an extremely wet year for the most part in 2024, and I get the question sometimes, what's an average year? There's no such thing as an average year, right? It's the conglomerate of all of that coming together. So genetics and what we're putting into the bag now and planting in the ground, I don't think we'd be seeing some of the yields that we're seeing and talking about this year if it wasn't for modern breeding programs and trying to hone in on making corn more stress tolerant, whatever that may be.
So to your point about being unable to predict year to year because we have these changes and years can look completely different, even stacked back to back, when you're building your plan for 2025, what do you need to take into account to know that there is that unpredictability every single year?
So we need to build a strong package in a nutshell. And that's honestly no different than we talk about in any given year. But this year in particular, I've encouraged growers, think about 2023 and then also think about 2024. Because your issues in 23 were not your issues in 24. And your issues in 24 were not your issues in 23. And I have no idea what 25 is going to look like. So with that being said, build that strong hybrid package. It's a lot like putting together a sports team, right? You need a strong offense and you need a strong defense. We dealt with a lot of issues this year. Too wet, too dry, a lot of wind events, whether it be green snap or root lodging across the state of Iowa this year. You want those good high-yielding hybrids that might not be necessarily agronomically perfect to hit that home run when the conditions fall in favor, right? but you also want some hybrids in that package that can handle variable soils, can handle being, wet early, can handle some of those wind events, because it's very likely you might have some of that too. So you just got to round out that package and plant multiple genetics to try and manage your risk at an operation level.
Did every grower in Iowa this year deal with nitrogen loss to some extent? And from what we saw this year, what did we learn about nitrogen loss and ways to mitigate it?
So if you go back to springtime, Mark, at the end of June, the majority of the state, actually I want to say the whole state, was sitting at more than 16 inches of rainfall for that early spring time frame. And what that tells us is it's very likely that we lost more nitrogen than we usually do, especially if you compare it back to the previous 2 years where it was very dry. So to make a blanket recommendation, yeah, pretty much every farmer lost some amount of nitrogen this year. So what we've been talking about going forward is how can we build some resiliency into your nitrogen management program when we come across another year like that. Because chances are it's going to happen again somewhere at some point. Might not be in our local geography next year, but it will happen again at some point. So a lot of nitrogen applications, sometimes we get hung up on the logistics of it, right? We like to do a lot of anhydrous. We like to get that done before planting because that frees us up to take care of the rest of the season after that, right? What we found this year is guys that did split apply nitrogen or decided to make some supplemental nitrogen applications, it paid. And it paid in a big way with a lot of bushels. A lot of times, 20, 30, even 40 bushel difference between some of these fields that got side dress and some that didn't. So a lot of times logistics trumps nitrogen management, but what we're encouraging guys is to think about that if we have another wet year. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that we have to be reactive to it because we don't know how that's going to turn out until it happens, right?
And then, Eric, we've just gone past Veterans Day here a few days ago, so I'd be remiss not to ask about Serving Those Who Serve, a great initiative from Wyffels. Could you tell us about that initiative for those who maybe don't know?
Yeah, so Serving Those Who Serve, probably the wrong person to ask because I don't exactly know how many years we've been involved in it, but I can tell you it's been a thing at least as long as I've been here, so 5 years now. But it's a partnership just to give back to community, right? And also through that partnership, we've partnered with Farm Rescue, and we've been doing a lot of PR around that. If you're not familiar with Farm Rescue, they're a nonprofit company. They're actually based out of the Dakotas, and they have since moved into some of the more Midwestern, what we would usually call the Midwestern states. And we've got a good partnership going with them. We've helped, I don't even know how many families, but we've helped multiple farm families get through natural disasters, illness, deaths in the family. That's where they come in, and they've been fantastic to work with, and it's been a good joint partnership through the Serving Those Who Serve program with Farm Rescue.
Eric Wilson of Wyffels Hybrids, my guest here today. Eric, is there anything else you'd like to let our growers in the state of Iowa know about when it comes to Wyffels Hybrids? Anything you're working on or just excited about going into next year?
We've got a lot of good products, some new ones that have done very well through the adversity of this year. So I would encourage anyone that hasn't tried Wyffels to give us an opportunity to see how we can do on your farm. If you're looking at how to reach out to someone at the local level, we've got a website, much like everyone else. You can drill down and find your local seed rep on that website or district sales manager, or just look for the white Wyffels truck that drives around in the countryside. There's plenty of them out there.
There are plenty of them in Des Moines as well, too. I can tell you that much, Eric. And I know Wyffels has certainly invested in the state of Iowa with the new distribution center in Ames as well. So a lot of exciting stuff going on with Wyffels. Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with me here today here at NAFB Trade Talk, and have a great rest of 24 and as we head into 2025. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to Eric Wilson of Wyffels for joining today's show, as we, of course, are already starting to think about growing season 2025. Coming up next on Ag Matters PM, it is the closing markets with Robin Schmahl of agmarket.net. But first, it is time for a word from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soybean Checkoff. You are watching Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
You're watching Ag Matters PM on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, and I'm joined now by Robin Schmahl of agmarket.net. Robin, we started off with a rally here today after a down day on Friday. Is that how we closed?
Yeah, well, not quite as strong as we were, but we did close higher, other than soybean meal. Soybean meal backed off quite a bit, but we did see a strong gain. Well, we were higher overnight, but then we really saw some strength. And probably the thing that I probably would attribute most to it is we'll use the term the big fake news that was reported by the Washington Post that President-elect Trump was going to scale back on some of his tariffs. Well, he denied that report after a while. So somewhere along the line from some sources or whatever, it wasn't correct as far as how it was reported. And once he came back in and said he denied that report, the market softened. Now, it didn't fall apart. It softened quite a bit from where it was. So we saw that volatility based on that incorrect information. And then the market settled out looking at South America and some of the concern that's starting to develop there, primarily in Argentina. It's early yet, but their crop condition on soybeans did decline 7% last week. Still early. They're looking at some hot, dry weather still. And some areas did get a little bit of rain, but there's one of the reporting agencies, the Buenos Aires Grain Exchange, they're reporting that is starting to impact the crop. Now, you got to take that with a grain of salt because we've seen that all the time too, where we see reports of decreasing crop conditions and that there's a concern developing, but it's still early yet. So I don't think that's going to have a lot of leg under the market, but it's enough to create some volatility moving into the new year when, people feel a little bit better. They want to enter some positions. They want to, they're done closing out their books for the year. So I think that was what kind of took over after the initial rally we had. Again, it's something to watch. It's pretty early yet. I mean, Brazil is about 97% done with their soybean planting. So they're a little behind what they were last year. And that was because of some of the dryness that was there when they were planting, but still nothing that's, I think in the bigger picture that should create a lot of concern. Now, we did have export inspections out this morning. Corn was at 847,000 metric tons in the estimate of 750 to 1 million metric ton. Soybeans at 1.285 million metric ton in the estimate toward the top end of the 800 to 1.4 million. And wheat was 412,000 metric tons. And that was above the estimate. They were looking at 200 to 350. Now, the other news in the market, and probably not a big market mover as such or whatever, is the Canadian Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, has announced he was going to step down, but he's going to stay on until a new leader is chosen to take over his position. But again, I don't think that was any real impact in the market as such. It was just some of the other before I mentioned items that really drove the market.
Let's go over to the other side of the ag marketplace in the livestock complex. How did the cattle and hogs trade on Monday?
Well, cattle continued to push higher, finding some strength from really, it seems like short bought packers. I mean, last week we saw northern, or I should say southern live cattle trade from $3 to $5 higher, and northern dressed upwards to $8 higher. That's quite a bit of a jump. So we have futures following through. They were higher on Friday. They're lower on Friday, but they're following through from last week. And we're not seeing that slow down. I mean, the packers have had to step up, and the feedlots really are in control right now. They have the choice of either selling their cattle or, holding them. So and they know that the packers are short bought, so they're trying to get as much out of it they can. Now, live cattle pushed to new highs again. I mean, it's incredible seeing the strength that's underneath that market. And the other part that's incredible is the strong box beef prices, showing that consumer demand remains strong even at these lofty prices. We really haven't seen the backing off of the consumer yet. At midday today, Choice was up $2 and Select was up $4.40. So that's what the packers have to keep in there, and they have to keep buying these cattle, even if they're higher weights than a year ago, which is good actually, or we might be really seeing a lot higher prices. But the packers have to stay in there and they have to buy these cattle because right now demand is fairly good. Now, on the hog side, we did see some buying interest at the lows today. About later in the morning, futures were pulled off of their lows. They uncovered some support from buying. Maybe that was because of the last 2 weeks. We saw pressure on the market. We did see lower cash, lower cutouts, but some of it had to do with positioning ahead of or before the end of the year. We might be looking at some longer term trades stepping up here with some buying interest coming in. Now, the National Direct Hog Report at midday was down $1.37. Very light trade on number of head traded, so not a good representation. Cutouts were down $1.57. That's the real key, that we have to see that demand. We have to see cutouts supported, or we're going to continue to struggle because there's been damage done on this hog charts. Technically, it's going to take a monumental effort to get that to turn around.
Robin Schmahl of agmarket.net, my guest here today on Ag Matters PM. Robin, what's the best way for our viewers to get in touch for more marketing information?
They can call me directly at 877-256-3253 or go to our website, agmarket.net. And there's an 844 number on there that they can feel free to call in, and somebody will pick up the phone and help them.
Robin, thanks so much for the time. We always appreciate it, and have a great week.
All right. Thank you. Same to you.
Thank you to Robin Schmahl of agmarket.net for our closing markets here today. Let's take a look at the closing numbers now, which you can find anytime under the markets tab of our website at iowaagnet.com.
March corn closes up 7 even at $4.57 3/4. March soybeans up 6 cents at $9.97 3/4. March soybean meal down $1.30 at $3.0730. March soybean oil up 40 cents at $40.33. Chicago wheat up 11 1/4 at $5.40 1/2. Minneapolis wheat up 12 1/2 at $5.90 1/4. Kansas City hard red wheat up 14 1/4 at $5.53 1/4. March oats up 8 3/4 at $3.31 even. On the Merc, February live cattle up $1.15 at $195.20. January feeder cattle up $1.47 at $266.30. February lean hogs down $1.12 at $79.65. February pork cutout unchanged at $92.20. Class 3 milk up 15 cents at $20.60.
That wraps up our closing markets for Monday, and that brings us to the end of today's show. You can find all of our content on our website at iowaagnet.com. You can follow us on social media at Facebook, X, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And of course, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click on the notification icon there as well to let you know whenever we have any new episodes available for you. You can also listen to our morning, midday, and closing market podcast, along with the daily Iowa Ag Matters podcast, by finding our podcast wherever you find your favorite podcast at Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and Podbean. From the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network studios in Des Moines, I'm Mark Magnuson. For Riley Smith, Dustin Huffman, and Andy Peterson, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.